The configuration of a classroom can profoundly shape the communicative relations between and among teachers and their students. In this short video, we will focus on and compare two such examples, the seminar and the clicker. In the case of the seminar, the instructor plays the role of a facilitator who guides the discussion and quasi-independent research that occurs. Open discourse is not only welcome but encouraged, and the objective is to make teachers teach less and the pupils learn more. This is in contrast to the more traditional lecture format, where the teacher is at the center of attention and is seen as the primary source of knowledge for their students. Accordingly, a defining difference between the two is that in the former, knowledge is actively questioned, while in the latter, knowledge is assumed and taken for granted. Fittingly, Watt points out that the etymology of seminar comes from the Latin root word seminarium, which roughly translates to a seed bed from which knowledge would grow. A key characteristic of these seminariums was the dual emphasis on the individual quest for truth and on the democratic dissemination of literacy. Significantly, this would require the instructor and the educational systems they operate in to relinquish a certain degree of control over what is defined as knowledge. This is the heart of Watt's argument, which centers on the debate over whose authority knowledge is derived from and the degree to which freedom of instruction can be granted. Clickers fulfill a similar purpose and are also used as a means to improve interactivity and bidirectional communication in the classroom. Caldwell defines clickers as small, handheld remote keypads that enable instructors to instantaneously collect student responses to a posted question, generally multiple choice. And much like the seminar, clickers are meant to get away from the one-way directionality of lectures. As noted by Caldwell, clickers compensate for the passive, one-way communication inherent in lecturing and the difficulty students experience in maintaining sustained concentration. Consequently, both the seminar and clickers share a common goal, which is the improvement of communication and interactivity between teachers and students. In each of these tools/methods, similar conversational patterns emerge: teacher to students, students to students, and students to teacher. This goal is reflected in the words of Watt and Caldwell, even though they are written over 50 years apart. As described by Watt, seminars enable the mutual interdependence of reading, writing, and general discussion under the direction of an expert on the particular topic. Or in other words, teachers are viewed as facilitators of learning rather than the font of knowledge. This is representative of Watt's central thesis that seminars offer better opportunities for meaningful learning in comparison to lectures due to the space that it gives for inquiry and discussion. That is, learning by doing rather than a didactic approach. The focus on mutual independence stood out to me when reading this quote, as it implies that both the student and teacher depend on one another to learn and teach respectively. Similarly, Caldwell writes that an underlying assumption noted in much of the literature on clicker usage is the conviction that covering content is not the most effective way to teach, and that active engagement leads to more effective learning. In doing so, she calls for a shift in mindset by educators and the systems they teach in, away from content coverage as the goal of instruction and towards active rather than passive learning in the classroom. We can see this shift in priority in modern curricular debates on the balance between content coverage and competency, skill-based assessments, which is of particular relevance for BC-based schools. Consequently, a question that emerges from the literature asks us to consider: how do some forms of pedagogical communication isolate while others connect? And in relation, do students learn better in isolation or as active members of a community? All forms of pedagogical communication either divide or bring learners together, neither of which should bear a normative judgment, depending on the intended purpose of the mode of communication. For instance, gamified learning brings students together to collaborate and problem solve, while the traditional school essay and over-reliance on textbooks can exclude and separate students by the knowledge that is prioritized and valued. Accordingly, the tools that we use in the classroom and ways that we configure our lessons can have a profound impact on how we communicate, to whom, and as such, who is excluded from the conversation.